from Los Angeles. Welcome back to Good Morning LaLa Land. I'm so excited and honored to have two beautiful women and hosts of Sexual Disorientation, Dr. Ramani and Sylvia Sage. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Guys,
gorgeous
so much
goddesses.
Yeah,
Look
absolutely.
at you guys.
Yeah, so you talk all things dating, relationships, sex, the taboo things in between.
Yes.
How did this podcast start?
Dr. Ramani started the podcast, and I was blessed enough to be asked to come along as a co-host. So
Yeah. I mean, we started it someone I had worked with for years in the industry, Frank Prather, had said, "Hey, I'm getting into the podcast business. Just talk about relationships, talk about sex." And so we sort of tried different iterations. The podcast world's it's an interesting one. Everyone loves them, but it's about hitting the right tone. And we kept trying different co-hosts, did it alone. And then Sylvia came on one day. Mm-hmm. And she brought this completely different perspective than me, but it was also convergent. Mm-hmm. And it's actually really hard. You guys know this, to find a co-host where it works.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the interesting pairing of a doctor, professor,
Yes.
and an adult film star comedian.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And it was
Wow.
actually perfect, because honestly,
Right.
if ever there was a yin-yang, I think we got it.
it's us. And I have so much respect for
Same.
this woman,
We both
so
do. Yeah.
it flawlessly just seems together.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's it.
What inspired Sexual Disorientation podcast? What
You
was
know,
it?
Rob, you and I have talked about
Yeah.
this. When you talk about sex in the United States of America, we either laugh about it or we're terrified of it. And clinically, I approach it as, you can either talk about it as tab A is going into slot B, and I do a lot of it from a public health perspective, as you know. But it's such an unhealthy space, and it doesn't need to be. Yesterday I assigned something to my students, and I said, listen, I want you to work on a health, behavior, or wellness for the semester. And that can be anything. And one of the things I said to them, I said, if you're in a relationship, I don't want you to go and find someone to do this, but have more sex, because it's a really healthy part of your life. And I'm not saying to go to extremes, or anything, just have sex more often, have touch. And so we don't normalize it, and we want it, but it's become a dark space. When you think of what's been going on with the Harvey Weinstein story and all of that, it's become this really confused space. And we do a lot of debunking around that, but there's confusion.
It is, and I did some research, because thinking about porn addiction and how it affects everything, and looking at one study, it found that basically porn-free relationships are stronger with low rate of infidelity. Number 2, they found that watching porn diminishes relationship commitment. And number 3, the fantasy alternative leads to real world cheating. And I try and take a very neutral place.
Right.
We're all about consciousness and knowing free will and everyone's expression. But these are scientists, these are psychologists, these are people coming up with this. So what do you think about that?
I think, honestly, sex and people watching porn and having sex together, it forces conversation, and that's huge in relationships in general, let alone the sexual side of that. But it forces people to, what is your fantasy or fetish, or what is yours, and you have to have those open conversations, and then hopefully find a happy medium in doing that.
But I think that's exceptionally difficult as a woman, especially right now, with the whole Harvey Weinstein thing and things that are happening. Owning our sexuality, owning our femininity, and being okay with
Right.
that.
It's hard, because with the Harvey Weinstein thing, there is so much good coming out of the Me Too's, but then it also takes sexuality and feminism back a step, and a little. I don't want to encroach on that too much, but it does make it to where it becomes harder to be a sexual woman in this industry. I know that personally, because I get a lot of flack for carrying myself so heavily in the sexual arena. But I think it just means that we have to continue having more conversations and speaking out.
I agree. The conversation is the most important thing, for sure.
But I also want to say that when we look at this research, I'm also going to put on my scientist scholar hat.
Yeah.
Here's where it gets tricky. Because the people who are drawn to watch porn may already temperamentally and dispositionally be oriented to infidelity.
For sure.
Does that make sense? So the tempting explanation is porn causes infidelity. It may very well be that the person who has that propensity is the one who's tuning in to porn.
Thank you very
And so
much,
I think that what we have to do is say it's a chicken egg issue. So let's say tomorrow we eliminated all porn from the world. would those people still find a way to be unfaithful in their relationships?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, that goes along with spiritual principle, because whatever's decided in mind is what, gets projected out. So we can't blame it on the alcohol or drugs or the porn or whatever it is. Just like you said, I couldn't agree more.
So that's
Great
where
point.
we have to sort of, it's the, I think a lot of people are looking for, like, well, there's got to be an explanation. And it's a difficult conversation. Sylvia and I tackle this in the podcast a lot. And this is where we have that mutual respect, where I say, listen, from a feminist perspective, I've said it over and over again. I struggle. I struggle with it because it is this sense of women are sexual objects, and it fetishizes sex in a way. A lot of women will say, my partner watches porn. I don't look like that woman. I'm never going to look like that woman. And I couldn't get into that position if I did Pilates for 10 years.
I think that watching that.
So, and then men too, they feel like they don't measure up, no pun intended. They're like, what is that? Because that ain't what's happening for me.
So I have a question for you guys, because I truly believe that intimacy is so important, and I believe that whether you are into, whatever style of intimacy you're into, that it is a place, such a beautiful place to expand a relationship. Where do you think, and how do you think people can take more time and develop this in a healthy sense and get into, Tantra sex? Sometimes people, we've all heard of Sting and his wife, doing 6 hours of sex and stuff like that. How can people take more time? Are there any things that you guys recommend for people to get more into their intimacy?
Well, we kind of spoke about this on our last episode, and it was being more adventurous in your sex life, taking a few more risks, if you will. Maybe not so much publicly around your children, but, publicly in your hotel or, something like that on a little getaway for the two of you.
I did this with a few clients actually around the holidays, which is, when people tend to have less sex, believe it or not. And I have them write down their fantasies on slips of paper and toss it all in a bag or a bowl and pick them out.
Right.
And then do them.
But does it have to be fantasy?
No.
Can it be meditation and sex at the same time?
But
Or
that
can
could be
it
the fantasy then.
Someone is very religious. Maybe it's, having prayer and sex. I don't know what that looks like. I think that people don't think. They think the only way to get, more intimate or more kinky or whatever it may be only has to do around becoming kinky.
But I'd say be careful.
Becoming more intimacy.
Fantasy's not just kinky.
Right.
Fantasy could just be that. Could we have sex for 6 hours? Could we have sex where we just touch each other for an hour and nothing's going inside of anything else?
Right.
So it's that I think that we have to be careful. As fantasy always feels like you're swinging from this chandelier.
Right.
That's not always what it is.
It's such a profound conversation on so many levels, and I've had long conversations about all of this. And one of the things that I was most interested in that you shared with me that blew me away, among other countless things, was the importance of physical touch, even for babies. Can you talk a little bit about that, Ramani? Because I think that's one thing, particularly in today's society, that's become, in some ways, it's confusing for people. So can you talk to me about?
People aren't being touched enough. Most of our interaction is taking place through a 6-inch screen anymore. We're not touching each other enough. We don't touch our children enough. We don't touch our friends enough. We don't touch our partners enough. It requires being in the same room. And so I think that we almost think sex is a get in, get out. And so I agree. We know that touch impacts the central nervous system. There are great studies done on infant massage that show that it relates to something called dendritic arborization, but literally the brain starts proliferating more and more connections. And to some degree that matters in adulthood because human touch matters. We are a physical species. We have more nerve endings on these fingertips than and our lips. Those are where all the nerve endings are. So touch matters. And we have more single people than we've ever had before.
Especially LA.
And so what does that mean? Because a lot of people think single means no touch.
Right.
And so people may pay for a massage, and I think that's part of why people do that, because they want desperately to be touched. They want to go get their hair shampooed so someone touches them. We're not touching each other enough. Now, I'm not saying
So you're saying that the
I'm
blowout
here for you,
bars are
Ramani.
really
I'm
about
here for you.
intimacy.
I'm sorry?
The blowout bars are really about intimacy.
Anywhere somebody touches you, I think that's why those honestly, if that's why anywhere and Reiki, all of those things, they're all about touch. Those are ancient practices. Many of those practices are based in touch. And now we're wonky about touch. Like as a psychologist in my practice, I can't be touching everyone. It's considered deeply inappropriate.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
it's so fascinating. I mean, and do you see, in what ways is this current sort of the challenges and opportunities we see around the sexual harassment stuff and the Time's Up campaign, how in what ways do you feel like what's happening around sexual harassment is informing this discussion around touch, around interacting with people, around genuinely connecting with people, but in a way that is mutually respectful?
You know what I'm going to say, Rob? Don't confuse touch and power.
Right.
Because harassment, that's about power. That has nothing to do with intimacy. Because the word sexual is in there, we're assuming an intimacy? Absolutely nothing. Harassment's harassment. Harassment's oppression. Harassment is power. And so touch and power never belong in the same sentence. Touch is really about keeping it equal. It's about two people. Intimacy is about equality. It's never about one being over the other. And I think that's the struggle. And all the stuff we've talked about in terms of entitlement and narcissism and all of that, we confuse that.
I have a question regarding touch because, I've seen in several of my friends' relationships, they get to a point where they don't physically touch each other anymore. They don't have that intimacy. They can still go have sex, but there's not the foreplay, there's no touching, there's no cuddling.
Right.
How do people navigate that?
I think at that point it's almost lost, and that's where you have to come back together on that. But it's probably better that she explained that. Because me, I'm the person I would say, like, at that point it's probably lost and go your separate ways. But
I don't think
she's more of a stick around.
It's go, go, go. It's do. It's get things done. Everyone's in a rush. Touch takes time. It means mindful awareness that there's someone around you, and you gently you're aware of, like, I'm just going to put my hands on this person. I'm going to, appropriately. And again, when you're talking about harassment, a lot of that's boundaries. So to your point, in relationships and everything, that takes a moment. Let me touch my partner, appropriately so, but I think that because partners are so quick to respond to each other by text and phone and FaceTime, I truly believe that that's getting lost in translation.
And stepping outside of your own wants and needs and seeing somebody else's, that's huge as well, because we get very self-involved and we get so wrapped up in our own lives and our own work schedule that we forget that they might be hurting without them even saying it to us.
Where in LA, all the narcissists?
Right.
So we're running out of time because we want to bring all these segments in, but where can everyone find you? Where can they find your podcast? Where can they find your work?
Well, you can find me online. You can find me at Twitter at Sylvia Sage XXX. You can find me on Instagram, Sylvia Sage Sex. I also run a different podcast called Sexy Funny Raw on YouTube, and then you can find us on Sexual Disorientation.
Beautiful.
And I can be found on Twitter at Dr. Ramani, DOCTOR Ramani, RAMANI, no XXX.
Yes.
And then Sexual Disorientation is available on iTunes. You can get it there. And you can also check out my book, Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Great book.
Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. It is the essential survival manual for the 21st century, especially in LA.
Couldn't agree
must-read
more.
book.
It's a must-read book.
Must-listen podcast, and I mean that. I mean, those are two sort of resources that I've used consistently.
Right. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with an extraordinary badass woman. So we'll be right back.